Welcome once again to Avila, Chicago, Making the Difference. And today we have Father Thomas Loya, and he is the pastor at Annunciation, a Catholic Byzantine church. Father, thank you for being on our show.
Good to be here.
Now, how should I refer to you, Father Thomas? Or?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. Now, Father Thomas, one thing we're going to talk about very heavily, but I want to introduce you, is the environment and religion. And your church has played a very pioneering role. And I found out about you by a friend of mine who is an Eastern Catholic. I want to talk a little bit about what Eastern Catholic means. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Father. Where are you from, and who is Father Thomas Loya?
Okay, originally, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I was born and raised there. But I serve in the Chicago area now as a Byzantine Catholic priest. I'm a pastor, of course.
At Homer Glen?
In Homer Glen, yes.
Okay.
My church is Annunciation, Byzantine Catholic Church in Homer Glen on Wilcook Road.
Okay, tell us the, so it's Annunciation Byzantine Catholic Church, and tell us the address.
14610 Wilcook Road in Homer Glen.
And that is Wilcook Road and where?
146. It's just south of 143rd Street.
Okay. And that contact information is on the screen, but for those who listen better than look, tell us your phone number. Area
code 708-645-0241.
And for the internet savvy, what is your website?
ByzantineCatholic.com.
Okay. Now, you were telling us that you're from Cleveland, Ohio.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you become a priest? How did you get interested in the environment?
Actually, I come from, I was, of course, born and raised a Byzantine Catholic, and I have a long family heritage in that church. In fact, I come from a long line of married Byzantine Catholic priests on both sides of my family, because we had the tradition in Eastern churches that married men could become priests. Priests can't marry, in the Eastern churches, if you're a married man, you can become a priest. So my great-grandfather and grandfather and something like that were priests, so I came from a priestly family. But I actually grew up and wanted to enter the art field, which I did, because I was kind of good in art. And later on, then I discerned a vocation to the priesthood. And out of the spirituality that I grew up in, the spirituality of the Byzantine Catholic Church, not only did I have appreciation for the art of the church and its liturgy and spirituality, but I also saw that that spirituality offers a certain worldview, a certain way to look at all of life, including the environment. And what happened was I had an opportunity to oversee the building of a new church complex in Homer Glen, Illinois. And Homer Glen is a kind of a semi-rural area, and they're striving to preserve that flavor, you know, the green spaces.
Now, they have, you're on the border between Cook and Will.
Right. Across the street is Cook County, and I'm on the Will side.
And you have forest preserves, at least on the Cook County side, if I understand correctly. And you even have what is known as wetlands in that area. Because I've seen quite a bit of wetlands. I was surprised how green and how rural it really is in that area.
Yeah, a lot of wetlands, a lot of water in the area, which in many ways was seen as a quote-unquote problem, especially on the property that we eventually bought to build our current church. And there was a lot of water that came through that property, and for the neighbors it was kind of a concern, a problem, you know, flooding and so on. But we saw it as opportunity, because we applied this worldview to this property, you know, where we look at water. The key word is the word gift. We said water is not a problem. It may be seen that way by the residents at the time, but water is a gift. All of nature, the whole earth is a gift. And so what we did was we had this opportunity to have this piece of property that allowed for a lot of work in terms of landscape. You know, it gave us a very broad venue in which to really work the land. It had beautiful sort of terrain. It had natural water, wetlands running through it, and it was actually a private residence. It was someone's home with like a large sort of front yard area. It was like a former horse farm, but a lot of the area where the water was kind of left to kind of just kind of go to deteriorate, something like that. So anyway, when we took it over, we sort of resculpted the land. And then we decided to develop a water management and sustainable environment master plan for the whole property to accommodate the water that was coming through it naturally, natural wetlands. There was a pond on the property. And to also restore the indigenous vegetation in that area. And what this was, this project on our part was actually commensurate. It was sort of like one of the first children born, as it were, of what was a green visioning project by the Homer Glen community. Homer Glen is basically newly incorporated, and they received a grant from the state called a Green Visioning Grant to literally design how their community would look, with a special emphasis of the balance between green space and indigenous vegetation and waters like that, and development. And that vision of Homer Glen is the same type of vision that we then adopted for our church property. And so in a sense, what we did on our property is an example of the vision of the greater community around us. So it was an approach that comes out of our sense of spirituality, of this sort of sacramental worldview. And also we wanted to do something that was like a community project. We wanted to make a contribution to the community.
Now, let me back up just for a second. You mentioned that you're a Byzantine Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And very briefly, because I'm going to focus mostly on the environment for this particular show, although I'm sure we'll have other shows with you, hopefully, about Eastern spirituality. It should be noted you are a scholar, so to speak, or a proponent of the theology of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk very briefly on that, that'll be a topic for another show. But first, tell us, what is Byzantine Catholic? Because I think most of our viewers, even myself, when you think of Catholic, you think of Roman Catholic.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But I came to learn that there were 22 separate actual churches within the Catholic Church,
Mm-hmm.
fully in union with the Pope.
Right.
Some of them with married priests
Mm-hmm.
and their own rules and
Mm-hmm.
jurisdictions. So tell us what the Eastern Catholic Church is, or what the other portions or parts of the Catholic Church are.
Well, the best way to understand it is think of it as dividing the world in half, the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere, East and West. And over history, civilization developed along the lines of an Eastern approach, an Eastern worldview, and a Western worldview.
East being, in this particular case, Eastern Europe, Greece.
Yeah, I would say that everything east of Italy, we'll say.
Mm-hmm.
Everything like Italy sort of dividing line, or the convergence point of both. Everything east of Italy would be the Eastern Hemisphere with its Eastern approach to life. In other words, the big questions of life, how you see life, how you see the questions of God and faith and the meaning of life and so on. There's like an Eastern flavor to an Eastern sort of approach, and there's a Western approach, and that would be from Italy and West. It's almost like the human race. The human race, we're all human, but we experience that same fundamental humanness from a feminine perspective or a masculine perspective, either man or a woman, and so, but yet you still experience the same humanness, but it's going to give you two different experiences of it. The church is the same way. The church developed along an Eastern and Western sort of worldview, and what happened was that, just like a relationship between a man and woman, it was harmonious, but at the same time there can be problems, and problems began to evolve, disagreements. And in 1054 AD, 1,000 years into Christianity, this Eastern-Western, East-West sort of dimension of the church, John Paul II used to call it the two lungs of the church, East and West. They had like a divorce. They had a split in 1054 AD. And the East called itself from that point to today the Eastern Orthodox churches. The West became known primarily as the Roman Catholic Church. Well, if we fast forward about 500 years, starting in the 16th and 15th centuries, parts of the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church reunited. They came back into communion with one another. And that's what we know today as the Eastern Catholic churches. So my church, the Byzantine Catholic Church, is one of those Eastern Catholic churches. In other words, one of those parts of the Eastern Orthodox churches that reunited with the Pope of Rome, starting in the 16th and 15th centuries. So that's how we end up now with about 21 different ways to live the same Catholic faith. There's like 21 different ways to do it.
Now, we should point out very briefly that at least one church claims to have never split, the Maronite Church, stationed in Lebanon, an Antiochian church. And then there are also Oriental Orthodox, some who are in union with Rome, some who are not, primarily Egyptians, Ethiopians, Armenians, and Assyrians. I think some Indians and Syrians too. And those are Eastern also, what were maybe termed monophysite or neophyte. So it's interesting how diverse Catholicism is, but I don't think many people know about it.
Right.
Even Catholics themselves, perhaps.
Right. Yeah, most of the time they know they think of the church as the Latin Rite or the Roman Catholic Church because, for one thing, in the Western world, it's the largest of the rites, and of course it has the high profile of the Pope. But if you go to certain parts of the world, like in Central Europe and parts of the East and Middle East, there are regions in which the Roman Catholic Church is not the majority Catholic Church. It would be an Eastern Rite. So, for instance, if you go to areas like Ukraine, most of the churches there would be Eastern Rite. They'd be Byzantine Catholic churches like mine. And the Latin Rite Church would be the minority in that region. But in most of the world, the Roman Rite is much larger in size and population than the Eastern rites.
And you are particularly of the Ruthenian Rite, of the your ancestors were from the Carpatho-Russian mountains?
Yes, Ruthenian refers to, it's an English word for Rusin. It was the people of Rus, which, as you say, Frank, was in the Carpathian Mountains, which is the exact epicenter of Europe. It's where Slovakia, Ukraine, Hungary all come together. There's a mountain range there called the Carpathian Mountains. And so those people, back in the 9th century, were evangelized by the Byzantine missionaries. And Byzantine means from the Byzantine Empire, which would be today modern-day Turkey. Istanbul used to be called Constantinople, and before that it was Byzantium. So the Christians from the Byzantine Empire eventually evangelized up into the Slavic regions and like into Russia. And so a lot of the people there ended up, like myself and in my ancestry, being Byzantine Catholic.
Okay. Now, what is unique about, let's first start with the Christian worldview. You were mentioning, what is a sacramental worldview? You had mentioned that before. Well, first of all, what is the incarnation?
The incarnation basically is this. In fact, there's really only one reality in life. Only one. And that is, especially, of course, speaking from the Christian point of view, that is that a God who is invisible, let's face it, God is invisible, God is spiritual, God is beyond us, He's transcendent, He's indescribable, ineffable, so beyond us. That invisible God, that indescribable being, this God, becomes describable, He becomes visible through the very creation that He decided He chose to create and to love and to unite Himself intimately. In other words, He incarnated. He actually became one with His own creation while remaining God. And so that is the fundamental reality of all existence. Everything flows from that. Creation itself, everything, every discipline in life is either a revelation or participation in the incarnation.
And is that where we get the sacramental worldview?
Exactly. The sacramental worldview means to see the whole order of creation, all of creation, as revealing God, as connected with God. And it's the view that Adam and Eve had. Adam had in the Garden of Paradise, before the fall. It's the view that enabled them to look at each other, as the Bible says, they saw each other as naked, yet were not ashamed. They saw each other through the eyes of God. And sacramental means that you see all things of the created order as coming from God, as filled with the presence of God, and you therefore then, and this is the key, if that's how you look at the created order, including the environment, that's going to determine how you interface with it, how you approach it, how you approach the human person, how you approach the whole universe, is going to depend upon, is your worldview sacramental or is it non-sacramental?
Now, I saw in media reports that in the Roman Catholic or Latin Church that the Pope wore some green vestments, and that there was a now added to sins, according to mainstream media reports and non-religious, that doing something negative to the environment, not recycling, was now a sin. Now, I don't know if that is true or not. Maybe you can comment on that. But I also saw that the Vatican had supposedly gone to a zero admissions policy regarding carbons. So I don't know if you were aware of that. Now, is it an extension of some of that? Or can you comment on it? Is it a sin to harm the environment? Is it a sin to recycle? Is this a new sin? Do you have to go to confession for it?
Well, actually, it's Frank, there's in a sense, like the Bible says, there's nothing new under the sun. In other words, it's old things but seen in new ways. There aren't new sins, as it were. There's just new ways of kind of doing the same thing. And once again, it's a matter of whether the view is sacramental. Now, what makes something sinful is when we approach it non-sacramentally. In other words, we're approaching something, we're interfacing with something, whether it's a person, life, nature, in a way that's dishonest to what it is. And that always is going to cause hurt. It's going to cause imbalance. And that's what we mean by sin. It's basically a dishonesty to the nature of something, to what something really is. So when you approach the environment and you will, especially willfully, knowingly, or carelessly pollute it and abuse it, that is coming from, yes, a sinful worldview, a non-sacramental worldview. It's coming from the same worldview that in that fateful moment caused Adam and Eve to reach for the forbidden fruit. When they did that, that was the beginnings of the so-called non-sacramental worldview. That was, in a sense, that was polluting the environment. Here was the tree, here was the fruit of the earth, and the Lord told them how to respond to it. Well, they chose a different path, see? So, yes, to not respect, not be honest to what the environment is. The environment is a gift from God. The environment is sacramental. The environment is holy. Holy in the sense that we don't worship it. Holy means it reveals God. It's there for as a gift to us.
Now, and is there anything unique in the Eastern Christian tradition, whether it be Orthodox or Eastern Catholic Christianity or Oriental Orthodox, specifically a cosmology or an approach? I know that the new patriarch, the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, is nicknamed the Green Patriarch. So is there some approach with the Divine Liturgy or the Jesus Prayer or approach to mystery or any of the early church fathers that seem to be emphasized or dominated in Eastern Christian thought? Is there something specific coming out of that worldview and approach that is unique to this environmental approach?
Yes, one of the reasons why the patriarch, and that's one of the leaders of the Eastern Orthodox churches, they have what's called patriarchs, almost like popes in a sense. But he is the one that is the preeminent patriarch in the Orthodox churches. The reason why you have a religious leader in the Eastern churches who is a world leader in this consciousness of the environment and green and so on is because he is simply functioning out of his own liturgical worldview, his own liturgical spirituality.
And what is that liturgical worldview or spirituality?
Very much like what it with the Sacramental. Liturgy means this. Everything in the world reveals God, but it also enables us to touch God, to actually become intimate with God. We become intimate with God through the physical creation and through our senses. That's why we have 5 senses. We have 5 senses so we can actually experience God. He can reveal himself. Now, when we do that and we recognize the holiness of creation, what we do then is we do the one thing that human beings can do that no other creature can do. This is the one thing that distinguishes us from the animals more than anything else. We're the only ones that can take this creation and offer it back to God in praise and thanksgiving. So that's what's called liturgy. A liturgical worldview is where you look at things as revealing God, but then you also offer them back to God. You preserve their holiness, as it were. You preserve their integrity, and you interface with them in a way that is based upon gratitude of offering. That this comes from God, we recognize it, we're to be just stewards of it, but we offer it back to God in praise and thanksgiving. In the end, he will take it back too. You know, the world is not ours. We're only the stewards of it. And so the Eastern Church is a very, very liturgical church. And because the soul of the Eastern Church is liturgical, therefore, it just follows naturally, it's going to be very conscious about the environment.
Now, you stated that we originally went wrong at the Garden of Eden. Is that correct? Now, were there any other points in history where we've gone wrong? Did moving towards industrialization or Enlightenment thinking or secularization, did those also lead us to a denigration of the environment away from a spiritual or religious worldview?
Yes, you see, as I mentioned, there's only one real reality. It's the God who makes himself visible through the physical, in other words, the incarnation. And life becomes this choice, in a sense, this battle. That's what really good and evil is, to either deny the reality of that. So throughout history, you'll see times when, we're starting the Garden of Eden, but later on, let's move up later in history. In the history of the church, for instance, you had what's called heresies. And the heresies, in one way or another, were denials of the reality that an invisible God could actually become incarnate. And say, for instance, the person of Jesus Christ, who is fully human, fully God, not either or, not one overshadowing the other or subservient, but both at the same time. Now, throughout history, there was always a wrong thinking. We call it heresy. There, in some way or another, was going to doubt that or confuse that. But now we have a spike, though, in this historical analysis. And that spike comes in, as you mentioned, in the 16th century, with the advent of the scientific rationalist worldview. For the first time, human beings discovered science as we know it today, which means for the first time human beings could do something to the created order, to nature, they couldn't do before. They could actually, in a sense, dominate it or manipulate it. So it started. Now, science is good, though. Science is good, but there was an error, an erroneous worldview that began to grow out of our newly acquired ability for science, and that worldview was this. It was that the physical order now, before, you had religions that, worshiped nature and so on, because nature was awesome. Nature was more powerful than us. Now we become scientific, and we see that we can now put nature in a test tube. We can do experiments. We can cure diseases. We can perform surgeries. Well, what happened was, little by little, we began to then look at the physical order of things, began to now start to kind of decrease in its value. And the scientific rationalist worldview started then to exalt just the mind and the rational and even the spiritual at the cost of the degrading, the gradual degrading of the physical. Now, what happens is you start to now have a disintegrated view now of life, of the human person and of nature. So what happens is now you approach even environment. Earth, the world is just something, well, I want to build a house, I want to make a development, I want to put in a strip mall. Well, I'll just come in and do it, because this is what I want. There's no regard to the earth, to the physical, and even to human needs. What is the cost to what does the human person need, the human body need, in terms of, clean air and water and lack of pollutants and proper nutrition, foods that have the proper minerals and so on like that. None of that is considered because it belongs to the physical order, and so it's almost dispensable. And so this was one of the biggest departure points. The industrialization, not that industry is bad, industry is good, science is good, but there was a worldview that began to evolve out of that, which still plagues us to this day. And the conscious system environment, really, what that really is it's the world starting to wake up to sort of rediscover or climb back on board the sacramental liturgical worldview that we lost. That, wait a minute, the physical is important. It's not just there for us to manipulate and to dominate and to do what we want with it and have no care of its value. See, we lost the value of the physical, and we exalted, the intellectual, the rational, and we became very disintegrated. And that has effects in the human person, in relationships, in environment, in global issues even.
Now, could one of the reasons that Eastern Christianity be more into the sacramental worldview or the liturgical worldview, at least vis-a-vis the physical world and science, that the East, because it was under Islamic rule, or that they never had the scholasticism, they never had Aquinas, they never had as pure linear Aristotelian thinking as they did in Roman Catholicism, or to a lesser extent, but still present in Protestantism, where you had more material thinking, and Lutherans, Calvinists, etc. Is that possible, or is that a reason that you don't have that same level of rationalism in Eastern Christian thinking?
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. Yes, the Eastern Church did not go through the Reformation as happened in the West. They faced other challenges, you said, Islam and different Christological heresies. The East had its own set of challenges, but the one it didn't have was a Reformation for the most part. But also the soul, the worldview of the East.
And they never embraced Aquinas.
No, never embraced him. They respected him, but they never embraced him as such, as a system. And one of the reasons is because the soul of the East is intrinsically mystical, and it has a strong sense of integration. And mystical and integrated are kind of the same thing. It means that it means it's living in the tension of paradox, where something can be this and that at the same time. You know, God is transcendent, invisible, and yet totally present all at the same time. He's not either or. So there's a strong mystical and integrated kind of a spirituality, worldview of the East, which again makes itself very amenable to this approach to the environment.
Now, how does the sacramental worldview in regards to nature contribute to the healthy development of children? And I asked that, and I think we have an image that we're going to show on the screen.
Yes.
But how do we also do that is that some people in the environmental movement, because I've interacted with some people in the Sierra Club, some of them also are proponents of population control or immigration restrictions that seem to be anti-teachings of Catholicism or most traditionalist Christian faiths.
This is why the whole renewed consciousness of the environment, really the leaders in this have to be the church, because the important thing here is a balance, an integration. You have to have what is honest to being human and honest to the environment, and the two have to go together. The environment, one of the things that nature does for children is it's very important for their balanced development, because as the church, as the Bible teaches, human beings are not a mistake. You know, we're not, it's not an unfortunate accident that we're here ruining the earth. It's not that. The earth is here for us. We're the only creatures made for our own sake. In other words, we are not here for the world. The world is here for us. So we still are the stewards, in a sense, the dominant creature of the world. But the world was given to us as gifts, so we have to respond to the world as gifts. We have to discover it, have a sense of wonderment. And so when children are out in nature, they learn it. They learn that they're the ones that have the superior status, the superior capabilities to study this fascinating thing called nature. And so they right away get this sense of a balance. And they get a sense of wonderment, which is absolutely crucial to healthy living, even as an adult. Wonderment and creativity. See, when children are out in the environment is like an outdoor classroom. They learn a lot of things, not just in a sense biologically, but they learn about the created order, they learn about themselves in relation to the environment. They develop a sense of wonderment, and sense of wonderment is what is really the spice of life. You know, mystery is the spice of life. And so we have to be very, very careful that we don't go out of that balance, and because it's very easy to use the growing environmental consciousness for what we call a anti-life agenda. You know, where we have to have, they use this word like footprint, carbon footprint, and things like that. So you be very careful. You have to edit words. You can't just have words get thrown out there and then it becomes a buzzword. Nobody questions it. You have to question every phrase, every word, especially buzzwords, and say, what does that really mean? What are they saying by that? What are the implications of that?
Because it seems like the implication of a carbon footprint is that somehow we're an annoyance, that we're using too many resources, not vis-a-vis other people, but vis-a-vis in of itself, so that one should be de minimis in their use of resources.
Right. No, that to me is actually there's a very sinister sort of undercurrent agenda that could happen in this really positive reawakening of the environment. I mean, it's a good thing, but there can also be, you can get some weeds in there, as it were, into the thinking, and those weeds would be this idea of almost like an anti-life, like. For instance, you start to make people feel guilty if they have families, have children. If you're going to push this whole idea of too hard in an imbalanced way, what are you going to do about our vehicles? You're going to force people to drive vehicles where only one person can be in them? That's going to then discourage people from having families, and families, children are a good for culture.
Well, I want you to keep on that point, but I want to ask you about flooding. What is the cause of flooding? And I think we have an image on the screen regarding that, but what is the cause of flooding?
Most of the flooding is caused by irresponsible, I'm going to use the word non-sacramental human development that humans do. In other words, we control too much, thought we could control too much the environment, where we ruin the natural floodplains and wetlands that can accommodate floods. We come into an area and to develop it, and we replace what was indigenous there, which could accommodate the waters. We now replace it with asphalt and concrete and turf grass and rooftops. Now, this is not bad in themselves.
Well, I want to then ask you a question then. Why are we so obsessed with turf grass?
Yeah.
You know, football, everything's a football field. And you used to have people who have the fake lawns and the like instead of natural vegetation.
Well, if we step back and think about it for a moment, how senseless it is. For turf grass, first of all, turf grass is not natural to a lot of this region. That's why it gets brown so easily in the summertime. So what do? We pour all kinds of water, all kinds of fertilizers and weed killers and chemicals, cost lots of money, lots of effort, into our grass, so it grows an inch, so we can cut it down on Saturday morning. And we pour more water and more fertilizer, so it grows another inch, we can cut it down. I mean, what is the point of this? Why do we have this love affair? I think it's, with turf grass, with something that is not indigenous to this area, I think it's an outgrowth of that non-sacramental worldview, which is actually, as a characteristic, it's sort of sterile. It's kind of predictable and sterile. If you look around at developments, a lot of times, new developments, they're all very similar in how they landscape the land. Whereas if you had developments where you allowed the natural vegetation to be there, you'd have something much more organic, much more life-giving. It's full of life. The prairie that we have on our property, it's always different. The things that grow here will grow somewhere else in another area next year.
So how can indigenous vegetation ease specifically the problem of flooding?
A couple ways. First of all, flooding happens when water sheaths off. Water moves too quickly off the surface, and then it doesn't have its natural places to go. So where's it going to go? It's going to go on our properties. It's going to go on our streets and where we don't want it. And unfortunately, again, with the non-sacramental worldview, we have this attitude of, well, we don't care where the water goes just as long as it's off my property. We don't care if the next guy gets it. Well, that continues to happen, and somebody's going to suffer. What natural indigenous environment does is we call it manages the water. It's called water management, where it allows the water to, as it falls or comes in from somewhere naturally, it allows it to kind of percolate, to meander. And that allows it to then go at a proper speed through an area, and it can go back into the aquifers, the water table. It can be cleansed, and then you don't have this sense of flooding, because the proper speed of the water, the proper distribution of the water that God intended, that God designed, and it's according to nature, is allowed to happen with the proper vegetation. When you remove all that, you have an imbalance in the way that water is supposed to move around.
I noticed that one of the specifics on your plan, because you have a vision, which I think you fairly well articulated. You have a mission statement, but you also have very specific proposals that most of it I think you've implemented. One of them is that you have permeable surfaces. Number one, what are permeable surfaces? And number two, how does it play into what you just described of allowing water to be retained and not run off? Tell us about permeable surface, where they are on your property and how they're utilized.
We're beginning to put permeable surfaces. We're putting it in sort of in stages. I wish I would have known then what I knew now when we put in our driveway. But the tendency is just to put in an asphalt or concrete driveway, a walkway. Well, if you put in permeable pavers, what they are is they're bricks, or that are put on the ground, the surface, instead of asphalt and concrete, and they're put in a way that they're interlocked in a way that there's openings there. 75% of your water that falls, say from a rain, 75% of it would fall on your property, in your driveways and so on. 75% of that would go back into the ground with permeable pavers, if you had your driveways and parking lots done with permeable pavers. And therefore, then you would stop all this pollutant runoff that comes from, the asphalts and the oils from the cars, like that. It goes back in the ground where it can be cleansed, naturally cleansed. You also have a safer environment, because when you have driveways, it's never quite perfect. So you have little dips and so like that. And a lot of times, for instance, in our church, like parking lot, you have concern about little ice ponds in the wintertime. Somebody gets out of their car to come to church. They step out into a little mini ice pond because there's just a little dip in the asphalt. That maybe a little improper drainage or something, or just from movement of the earth. So what happens is they slip on an ice pond there. That during the daytime, the sun comes out, it melts. Okay, fine. But as the sun goes down in the evening, in the wintertime, it refreezes. Now you've got these little ice ponds all over your parking lot. Well, when you put permeable pavers in, you eliminate the ice pond. So you have a safety feature, plus they look beautiful. It gives it a very sophisticated, actually artistic look to your parking lot. So it's something we're putting in gradually in stages, because it's very costly to retrofit it, unfortunately. But so that's why we're doing it in stages. And what we just did, we just put some in a couple of the strategic parking spaces that were, once you know it, some of the prime parking spaces, unfortunately, developed a little bit of a drainage problem, which were creating these ponds and these of water that would freeze in the wintertime. Well, now we've eliminated that, and we've got this very attractive, very functional, and very safe now parking area.
Now, one other of your specific plans is green roofs. What is a green roof? What does it accomplish? And tell us where on your property you've put in green roofs.
We haven't put the green roofs in yet, but that's part of our master plan. See, we have what's called a master plan, which they can see on our website. They can go to the landscape area on our website and actually walk through our master plan. And the master plan is just that. It's a plan that takes you years into the future, that you sort of chip away at over time as you get the funding and just as you're ready to do the next phase. The idea of a green roof is where you actually, and that's why we have to go through a study to check out, make sure the roof can accommodate it. Green roof puts literally gardens on top of the roof, which is going to actually be better for drainage. It's actually going to be better for climate control. In other words, it will actually keep your roof cooler and keep it warmer in the wintertime. It's actually better for in terms of utilizing heat, keeping heat in, and also in cooling a building. In fact, they have such a thing here in Chicago on top of City Hall, in some of the skyscrapers in Chicago. The mayor has put green roofs up there. He's raising bees up there, and so you have something. It's something beautiful. It's it's indigenous. It's good for the roof, but you have to make sure that the roof actually, the engineering can take it, because there's a certain amount of weight in it. So it takes a little bit of study, but that is one of our next phases of our
and there are some green roofs downtown, like you said,
yes.
City Hall, and some other ones that are quite impressive. And like you said, they even have some not human life, but animal life that are there. Now, one other item you have is you have wetlands on the property. You kind of describe that, so you were talking about indigenous vegetation that you do on the property, as well as wetlands, and you've incorporated it into a spiritual, because you have them on a meditative type of walk.
Yes.
Tell us about the walk you have and why that is important to a spirituality. I guess you're an Eastern Catholic, so I don't know if you pray the Rosary, but one could praise the Rosary on the walk, or some other form of prayer, or just some reflective walk. But tell us how that integrates prayer and your wetland and indigenous vegetation and the like.
What we did was we have paths going through our prairie area and where the wetlands are. And along those paths we have places you can sit, and meditate and pray. For anyone, even if you're not Christian, even if you could be an atheist. But everybody, it's human to need time in quiet and silence, and especially to be around the natural environment. And so we have designed our property in this way so as to make it a welcoming place for anyone who would want to just, like a respite, a kind of oasis. And people do come. They pull up in a driveway and they get out of their car and they walk through there and they just enjoy it. The other night I saw a family, children with their mom and dad, the children walking around there, meditating, looking at the flowers. And we do have icons there. We have little prayer gardens, and that's going to, again, part of our plan to develop more and more. But the idea is that you can walk through the prairie area, there's points of meditation, and it's for anyone to just seek that solace and that peace.
Now, how can the church, I guess specifically the Catholic Church, my father is the commissioner of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District Greater Chicago, he's an elected official, has been speaking about trying to bring in more religious leaders, doing things like green roofs, or maybe, I agree with you that you want cars that can fit your family, but there are hybrid vehicles that are bigger now. People can bicycle, carpool, take public transportation, whatever number of things people can do for the environment. But what role can religious, specifically I guess the Catholic Church, because then they're probably the largest single church, but other Christians play, or other religions? And do you know if other religions are doing things? I don't know. I mean, I hear things here and there. I did talk to some pastors in the African American community, and their concern was cost. Yes. And interest to their parishioners. I did talk to some others, about there was a cost issue. So, and then, so what are other churches doing that you're aware of? And then, is there a cost issue? And then, what can churches do?
Well, in regard to the cost issue, It's actually overall, in the long run, more economical to go the green route, as it were, in as much as you can. Some churches feel that, well, they're in the inner city, perhaps they're surrounded by, you know, concrete and so on. They don't have, like we had the opportunity to have 10 acres of property in a semi-rural region, so there's a lot we can do with it. But you can still do, you can take areas, we call them like little rain gardens or designated areas in your property, even if it's in a city, and designate areas in which you put this kind of vegetation in and do things with water, even with little fountains and so on, and little ponds. You can still do that. And you find that to do this is going to actually be more economical because, like for instance I mentioned before, you take an asphalt driveway. It has to be continuously repaired and resealed. You know, and it lasts only for so long. Then after so many years, you have to redo the whole thing for lots and lots of money. Whereas you've got bricks there, and where the water is going down in the ground instead of seeping under and ruining what would be the asphalt, you've got a cost savings there. You're not going to have to repair that for years and years to come. You have to continue sealing it and filling cracks. You know, you don't have dangerous areas, you know, ruts and chuck holes and that kind of thing. So it's going to be economical to do this kind of thing, especially in the long run. Probably where a lot of people think of it as a cost is we have to now, in a sense, retrofit things. But I think that if churches are, any church is deciding to build or relocate or make an addition or do anything like that to their property, the thing to do is to design, take this environmental design, you know, wet it with what you want with your facility right at the beginning. Then you're not retrofitting. You're doing things right at the beginning, and they're going to find that it's going to be a great savings.
Now, are you aware of what other churches are doing? You seem to be a pioneer, and you have a very comprehensive, articulated, explicit plan. Are other churches, I saw that there's different environmental groups with churches, that some churches are speaking out on the issue of global warming, some are not. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
There are some churches that are starting to get more and more on board, as it were, of this consciousness. I think that churches hold the key, but they themselves, what they have to do is they have to look into what is, see, this whole spirituality, as it were, this whole approach to the environment, to the earth, is natural. It's indigenous, as it were, to religion, to all religions, because religions are about the good of the community. They're about the good, and they're about doing what's right. You know, they're about, you know, an ethical system, an ethical way to respond to life and to civilization. All religions, that's what religion is, regardless of what it is. It basically has this, underneath it all, it has this idea of the good. So churches, by nature, will have to take a leadership role, even more than they are. They have to start to really become more and more conscious and realize that they need to lead in this, so it stays balanced. And also because it's honest. It's honest about who we are. This is our spirituality. This is how we look at the earth and look at life. And one of the reasons that we've taken a leadership role is, by God's grace, we had, I think, you know, special blessings, that we had the type of property, and the community we're in, Homer Glen, took a leadership role in becoming a green community, and that got us inspired in it, and we want to do something that was commensurate with the vision of our community. But, you know, I see churches around me, some of which have sizable pieces of property, just acres of turf grass, you know, and we try to incorporate them. We try to invite them to, like, certain talks that we give and seminars and presentations that I've done in conjunction with other environmental groups, to try to get the churches, first of all, to raise their consciousness of this, to be an example, and take a leadership role in this. So churches are getting more on board of this whole approach, but I think they have to do it a lot more. They realize that it's a gift that they have within themselves. They have to look at themselves and realize that it's in there.
Since the Catholic Church is perhaps more hierarchical than other churches, could not a cardinal say, okay, every church has to have a green roof, every new parking lot could be permeable surface, and have kind of a central planning, so to speak?
Oh, yeah, that would be one terrific way, that when you build, In fact, I encourage my own bishop this way, that my fellow priests, that
Now, is your bishop out of Ohio, or?
yeah, he's in Ohio.
Okay.
The reason is because Eastern churches, since we tend to be less in population, more sparsely populated, we have big territories.
And then your patriarch is in Europe?
Our patriarch for the Ruthenians is the Pope.
Okay.
But other Eastern churches have their own patriarch in communion with the Pope. So yeah, my bishop is in Cleveland, and whenever I speak with him on this, or our fellow priests, if they're going to consider building or renovating, I will encourage them to have this as the overall plan. In other words, the overall approach to how we should build, and even to retrofit our churches now, if we haven't done it already. You're right, Frank. You're right on. This should now become the master plan, because it's a great witness. It's the churches being honest to who they are. It's churches taking a leadership role, and you know, it's one of the, I have found it's one of the most effective ways, one of the most beautiful ways for churches to interface with the secular world, with even people who maybe you're an atheist, agnostic, whatever you are. We have a common meeting point here in this idea of the environment.
Have you presented this to Cardinal Francis George or the United States Bishops Conference?
Well, I haven't done it quite on that level yet. I've done it at the level of my own bishop, and in talking with other churches, other church leaders, and in working in conjunction with the environmental groups. It's kind of interesting that the environmental groups, regardless of what their religious persuasion is, maybe they have none, whatever, but they'll come and we'll work together. We'll make presentations together and seminars together, because it's a beautiful convergence point. Regardless of your belief, if you have any kind of sense of what is right, this is basically what this boils down to, is simply doing the right thing.
Now, do you think there's some opposition from, for example, we mentioned that some environmental groups are against big families.
Yes.
Yet most traditionalists, traditional Catholics being probably one of the biggest, but also Hasidic Jews, some Orthodox, have large families, very large, sometimes 8, 9, 10, 11, which would be large in this cultural context. There's an opposition. They feel, okay, well, you're making a big carbon print, so I don't want to be involved with these people.
Right.
Now, so is there some opposition because of things like the carbon print?
Yes, there is. But you know, again, that's a matter of, we have to kind of meet that head on, very forthrightly, because that's a fundamentally flawed view that's going to endanger what is the positive reawakening of the environment. Because what it is basically is this: we're part of the earth, right? Human beings are part of the created order. A flower is part of the created order. Water is part of the created order. Okay, we have all been created out of the same earth. All right. Well, there's a way to approach all the created things in a way that is honest to what it is, to what a human being is, and human beings by nature are communal beings. We need people. We need population. There isn't an overpopulation. There's actually an underpopulation. In fact, in many countries in Europe today, they are literally not reproducing themselves. They have to import immigrants. Nothing against immigrants, but the fact that they have to import them because they don't have enough of a workforce. Germany's paying couples to have babies. We're finally realizing that some of this talk, these phrases like carbon imprint and this overpopulation,
zero ZPG,
yeah,
zero population,
is backfiring on us because it was going against the natural order of things. Again, you look at the Bible; it says, "Be fruitful and multiply."
Now, is there also some opposition? I saw a website of a Catholic apologist, probably of the conservative or neo-Orthodox view. I think it's a good website, jimmyakin.com. Jimmy Akin, he's worked for, I think, Catholic Answers. And he had some blog posts mocking Al Gore and, some of the global warming. Is there a fear by some of the what may be considered conservative Catholics that there is an endorsement of a particular political point of view or a particular candidate, like let's say Al Gore, for example, because he has the now famous movie on global warming, or that we're endorsing the particulars of a position that is not completely scientifically validated?
Right.
That it's a prudential judgment, that it's not something that's a theological necessity.
Well, I think, again, it's a matter of balance and honesty about you have to be very, science has to be very honest. whether it's about environment or wherever, you have to have honest science, honest scholarship, not agenda-driven, on either side, liberal, conservative, whatever, however you want to break it down. And there is, if you take someone like Al Gore, okay, there is some truth to what he's about, but there's also things that are, in fact, not good science. There are things that are, the church, you notice the church's position on this is, well, let's really look at this thing. Let's look at this whole global warming thing. The church isn't denying it or affirming it. It's saying, okay, there seems to be a reason to look at it, but maybe it's a good thing. You know, maybe it's all in God's providence. Maybe it's part of the natural cycle, natural order. See, the church, the key thing about the approach from the church is that it's open to, completely dedicated to honesty, to not to agenda, but to an honest look at things. And that's when the church arrives at a particular statement or teaching, when it looks at something completely honestly, not through agenda. So I think that you have to be careful of this dualism, where people become polarized and then they kind of go at each other and dismiss each other. There is correctness and goodness in all sides of this, but you have to be open to looking at it as, the key word is honestly. You know, what really is the honest truth about the earth, about the world, about the history of the earth, about human beings in relation to the earth.
Well, based on that last question and answer, what about global warming? What is global warming? Is global warming happening? Is it bad? What can we do about it? You know, if you see the Al Gore movie, you may think that the world is ending.
Yes, right, exactly.
You know, I am not a scientist, although I know some about it. I'm a lawyer by trade, but it does seem like there is a good deal of truth in that point of view.
About the global warming?
The global warming.
Again, there seems to be a lot of reason to conclude that there is a global warming going on. But there's also a lot of very good science that challenges that. And this is what we have to bring both of them in and look at them, again, very honestly. But the more important thing is that, let's say global warming was a fact, that it is happening. All right, that brings us to another question then. Is it our fault, as it were? That's where you got to be careful, because that's where you can bring in that sort of hidden anti-life agenda, that it's our fault, therefore we have to eliminate ourselves or drastically change our life to, in essence, to discourage life. Remember, environment is about life. We're all about life. And that includes human life, too. Humans are about life as well. So even if there is global warming, if that's a fact, is it necessarily a bad thing? Is it a kind of a cycle? Is it, how much of it is caused by us? I think these are the questions that have to be looked at very honestly. But what's happening is we're jumping to conclusions, or on the other extreme, we're dismissing those conclusions outright. You know, and that's, again, I come back to the fact that it's got to be, this is why the religions, certainly the church, has to be leaders in this, because our approach to these things is total and a relentless search for honesty. What really is the picture here? What really is happening here, and why? Not agenda and not extremes, not dualisms.
Now, you also teach on something known as the theology of the body. It's probably a topic we could do a whole nother show, or probably 10 other shows on. But briefly tell us what the theology of the body is.
The theology of the body is the sacramental worldview we talked about earlier, applied to the human person. It's the theology of the body. Theology means
specifically then with human sexuality.
Yeah, specifically human sexuality, the human
procreation.
Person. Yes, procreation and relationships between man and woman. In other words, it's a theology of gender. It's a theological anthropology, which means the why behind being human, the why behind being male and female. And that why can be read, can be decoded, as it were, in the language of the body. In other words, our body, just like all of nature, again, it's all the same type of approach. What is the created order? You know, the created order, created things speak.
Well, let me break in. There's two words that you used that were very powerful to me. One is that women are the archetype of humanity. And number two, that we're the kings and queens of our households.
Yes.
And that's a very nice thing, I think, positive thing. And I know in the Orthodox and Eastern Catholic weddings, if we're talking to deer hunter, they placed a crown over the bride and the groom. And while you answer that, does the theology of the body juxtapose with the sacramental view on the environment? And how does the theology of the body, if at all, and how does the view of the human being anthropologically or human sexuality interact and interpose with a view on the environment?
That's a beautiful and complex question, Frank. You see, again, it goes back to the sacramental worldview. Nature, all of the created order, everything in creation, including ourselves, speaks a language. In other words, it tells us about itself by how it's designed, how it acts, and our experience of it. The theology of the body means that our bodies reveal God. Through our bodies, the language that they speak, precisely the fact that they're gendered, we're male and female, tells us something about God. So we participate in God. It's how God reveals himself. We actually are able to participate in the way that God loves us, how he loved his own creation, how he essentially entered into a spousal relation with his own creation. And from the theology of the body, we learned the real meaning, the why behind our being male and female, and therefore how to be male and female. Let's take that to the environment. A male, by nature, his body, what does his body say? His body is designed to act upon the environment. Men are by nature external. And so if you act upon the environment, on the positive side, you're going to act upon, you're going to steward the environment in a way that is life-giving and respectful of it. But if you act in a way we're going to call it the fallen male, you're going to, in a sense, abuse or rape the environment, as we do, which results in, of course, flooding and pollutions like that. So what has to happen is you need, in a sense, a certain sort of consciousness of the sense of like the positive masculine, but also the feminine element, that the earth is beautiful. A man has to respond to the earth the same way he responds to a woman. You know, the woman is beautiful. The woman reveals something about God and created order. And so if he's going to be true to his authentic maleness, he'll respond to the environment out of that authentic maleness, out of that sense also of the feminine as well. So you actually have, by understanding the theology of our bodies, what it is to be, what it really means to be man and woman, that can actually influence how you interface even with the environment. And so it's all connected. It's all about sort of decoding the language of the whole created order and then responding to the created order, including ourselves, one another, in a way that's honest to what the nature is telling us.
Okay. That's about all the time we have, but I want you to tell our viewing audience one more time your address, your phone number, and your website. If anybody wants to contact you, either about the environment or Eastern spirituality or Byzantine Catholicism or whatever.
Okay. Again, my parish is Annunciation.